and we need to talk about the death of Sid Vicious at the age of 63. And Dutch, you were the one who told me about it.
Well, I've known Sid since not the day he started, but probably in the first couple of months that he started. I was introduced to Sid Vicious, and his real name is Sid Udi. And I was thinking, Udi, I don't know, Udi, Tootie, Fruity, I said, maybe that's a bad name for a wrestler. I said, we need another name for him. And because I wasn't the booker, but I was just talking to the booker. I said, you know what we need to call him? And I had been, and I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. It's a great story. I just listened to it myself. The Sex Pistols, Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious, I had just been reading about them. And I said, we need to call him Sid Vicious because it fit the wrestler Sid more than it fit the musician Sid. And I said, Sid Vicious, that's a great name for a wrestler. So we called him that. And he kept it basically till he stopped wrestling. He was still Sid Vicious, good guy. And I got several stories about him. One of the things is Sid, and I've told this story before, but I'll get back to it. Football season, and people in the United States, they will, back up this fact. It's like soccer, or you call it football in England or Europe.
Yeah. Season's different over here, though, because they only get 6 weeks off. I think American football's, September to January? Something like that?
Yeah. So, but it's the main sport, college football, American football. And I was working for WCW, and it was me and Sid and the Iron Sheik riding together. This is the damnedest time I've ever spent in the wrestling profession because we were working 7 days a week. And then on Mondays, after we finished the week on Sunday, and sometimes double headers Sunday, we would all fly back to Atlanta to do the TV show. So, and I was riding with Sid Vicious, and the Iron Sheik. And I say that I was out on the road 64 days. Well, I couldn't take 64 days with the Iron Sheik and Sid. So I had to actually jump ride about halfway through it. And I'll tell you why. Because it was getting too much for me to put up with Sheik and Sid. So we ended up one Saturday night in Knoxville, Tennessee. And of course, us being wrestlers and stupid, we knew that like the big stadium in Knoxville seats 105,000 people. Of course, they don't all just come from Knoxville. They come from all over. So all the hotel rooms are booked up. So after the show on Saturday night, following the game, of course, there's no hotel rooms. And we were going to stay over and make another town the next day and then head to Atlanta. Well, everything's full. Everything's full. Nothing. We finally found a hotel that ordinarily would rent for, back in those days, like $15 a night. It was $100 a night because everything else was full. You either took it or you didn't have a room for the night. And this room, we finally got in there and it had a black and white TV, some rats running along the floor. Oh my God, it was a horrible room. And we didn't get in about 2:00 in the morning. And I'm thinking, God, and we had to be in it to like 7. So somebody come up, the Sheik, this was his bright idea. So Vicious, let's go have a little drink. And they asked me, and I don't drink, but I said, yeah, I'll do anything just to get out of this damn room. So we left. Sid had rented a big, big car, big Cadillac or whatever he rented. And we took off. And most of the bars, the respectable bars, closed down at 2:00. It was already 2:30. And they were all closed. I said, oh, God, I got to go back to that stinking ass room. But we finally found one of those after hours clubs where you bring your own booze. And we go in there, and all you do is when you go in there, you bring your booze with you, and you just pay for the setup. That's how they legally get by with it. So, and I think we had some in the car or something, but we just wanted to go somewhere. Hell, we would just pay for the Cokes, the setup without the liquor. So we went in there, and it had a dirt gravel parking lot. And I've said this before. Guys, if you pull into a bar and it has a gravel driveway or a gravel parking lot, look out, because you're in for trouble. So we pull in and we're trying to get parked. And a guy was up there talking to a woman in front of us and he wouldn't move. So we couldn't pull in. And finally Sid went, beep, beep, kind of rudely. And the next thing we saw come out the side window was this, F you. And the sheik saw it. He went, oh my God, Sir Sid. Oh, Sir Sid Vicious. Oh, jabroni. Very disrespectful. You need to slap him. So he got Sid all fired up, and Sid went up there, hey, you son of a bitch, move, you got blah, blah, blah. And the next thing I knew, Sid threw the punch through the window and the car took off. And he got back. Oh, Iron Sheik loved that. Oh, thank you, Sir Sid. You teach a jabroni a valuable lesson, not disrespect to Sir Sid. So we pull up right by the door. So we go in, and everybody knew us. Everybody. There's Dutch and there's Sid. Oh, there's Iron Sheik. And so they all just dispersed in the bar. So I stayed by the front door. I didn't even want to go back there. I just didn't want to stay in that room. So all of a sudden, here comes Sheik, and he's got this woman with him. And he puts her up against the counter right in front of me, really. And he's playing with her and he's kissing her and he had his hands on her breast, her little titties. And finally they're out of the dress. They're out of the bra and he's kissing on them. And I was kind of enjoying the show really a little bit. And finally a big fan walked by and he said, oh, there's the Iron Sheik. Iron Sheik, I'm a big fan of yours, man. Hey, would you sign this? And he interrupted the Sheik when he was in Sheik's time. And Sheik, he just turned away from the woman and he slapped that guy. It sounded like a damn 38 damn Luger going off. And then Sheik went back to her and the guy he didn't know what to do. He was about halfway knocked out. And I've said this, I said his face looked like Chernobyl, like red. And there was a cop right beside him. He says, hey, did you see that? He slapped me. Did you see it? The cop went, man, I didn't see nothing. And he walked off. It's already about 3:30 in the morning. So, everybody's drunk as hell. So finally I see the guy take off and I go find Sid. I said, Sid, we need to get out of here. I told him what had happened. And I said, the guy went to get his buddies, I guess. I don't know what he did. He may have, let's get out of here. Okay. Yeah. Right. So we go up, we grab Sheik and we go out and the car is right beside the door. And we look at the car, the whole back windshield is smashed in. And the guard says, oh, some guy come with a hammer and busted that windshield and said, if you come out to tell you that you know who it's for, but who it was from, and who it was from was the guy he punched before we went in. So the guy just circled back around, busted the windshield out and left. So I get in the front, Sid gets in the front, Sid and the girl and the woman, they get in the back seat with glass all over the seat and we go back to the hotel. And then we finally catch about a 7:00 flight to Atlanta. It was too much. Crazy. And we was working every day. So, and that was in the middle. That was when I decided I need to jump ship and go with somebody else the last I was already 3 weeks or 4 weeks into this arrangement with Sid and Sheik. So I said, I need to I need to change it. So I did change it. So I didn't spend the last 30 days with them, thank God.
At one point, Kevin Nash joined you, and that's his first road trip. And he tells a story where it's you three, and him, and he's just like, "What have I got myself into?"
So I don't remember him joining us though, but I remember joining him. I said, and Kevin was very, very green. He had just started really. So I jumped in there with Kevin, thank God, because, Kevin's a great guy to make a trip with because he's got all these stories and he's funny as hell. And, and that made if you travel in the wrestling business, and it's probably true with any other business too, if you travel with somebody, make sure they're interesting and they can talk to you and you enjoy talking to them. Because sometimes, if it's a miserable trip and if you don't enjoy who you're with, it can make a bad trip more bad, more miserable. So did Kevin say anything about the trip?
I think the story he said, he just went to the gym and Iron Sheik's doing the clubs. Sid is just jacked and you're in the waiting room reading a newspaper.
USA Today. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We would go. And the reason I would even go, we had to check out the hotel. So, because if you stayed too late, they'd charge you another day. So they would go about 10 o'clock in the morning, 11, whatever. And then they'd all go work out. What am I working out for? I'm not in the ring. I'm just the manager. And I'd get my USA Today and I'd go up and find me a chair up front and I'd start reading the paper and watching them work out. Hey, they work out pretty hard too.
Let's talk about Sid's career then. So I don't know. I mean, you'll know this, I'm sure, but he was really a product of Memphis. So I don't know what he did in younger years. I just presumed he would have been like playing basketball or something, maybe. But there's not much information on his formative years. But
I don't remember him ever talking about playing basketball.
Well, what did he do? I presume he was an athlete in his younger years at some level.
I think he was a weightlifter, a bodybuilder. Because when I saw him, he was jacked. And he got more jacked later on. So he found out more. But he was a good athlete. He was. So, and he's 6'9", and he had a hell of a face on him. He looked like he was a psycho. I don't know why. Did he ever make any movies?
A couple of B movies, I think that's about it. Like not Wrestlers versus Zombies, but something like that. Some like B grade kind of thing. Low budget.
Well, it amazed me that not a lot of he didn't get a lot of Hollywood work in the movies, because you can't make a face. He had the face already. He looked like he was crazy. Now, I don't know if he was crazy. People called him crazy, but he had the face for it.
Well, what was Sid like in real life then? So I know obviously Sheik was making it even more difficult than Sid was, I guess, on that trip. But I mean, I've heard from different people I've interviewed that, very intense, potentially quick to anger, great family guy. Great family guy as well.
He did have a bad temper. What
would set him off then?
You couldn't, rib him. You couldn't rib him because then he'd get pissed off. And then when the attention came back to the person who ribbed him off, it wasn't good. So, of course, like me, I take the path of least resistance. So I could tell if he was getting a little pissed off, and I'd make a joke of it, and that's how I stayed out of a lot of fights. You don't piss guys off so they don't get mad at you. But I've seen. See, Sid was also taking steroids. And steroids will make you very short-tempered. And especially when he didn't eat. When he got hungry, he got short-tempered. And I've seen people like, and he would holler at them, or just people he didn't even know. And but you could tell that I guess people say it's an anger issue. But he did have a short temper. Anything would set him off. And I don't care if it's a woman or a guy. It did set him off. And he'd go off.
I've also heard that, like unfailingly polite, really devoted family man and that kind of thing. So it's a real disparity between sort of home life and work life, I guess, in in that sense.
You know, I never met his wife, and I never met his son. I think his son is named Gunner.
Yeah, I think he's got 2 kids, and one of them's called Gunner.
Well, I remember the first one, but he never talked about him that much. He would talk about his wife every now and then, but yeah, I think he was a pretty devoted family guy. He really was when he got away from wrestling.
Did he?
And you know what his other love was? We talked about it a little earlier this morning.
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. Trust me.
Hey, are you censoring me?
Oh, no.
Folks, he is censoring me. I can't tell. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was, because that's exactly. Did he ever really love wrestling, or did he just treat it like a job like anything else?
Well, I don't think he loved it like some of the other guys loved it. I mean, that was their life. I don't think wrestling was his life. It was something he can make good money at, and that he was a natural for the look. I'm not saying he was a natural for the work, because he's 6'9". I mean, you know, bigger guys can do less work and actually sometimes get more done and they just use their size. And he did that because it's always worked up to that point in his life, him being 6'9", and it probably kept him out of a lot of fights too. Somebody would look at his size and they'd back off. Because, you know, when you guys 6'9", 320 pounds with no fat at all, you know, if you just saw a picture of Sid, you might think he might be just 6'2", because he was, you know, shaped that way. It was, you know, a lot of guys 6'9", you can tell they're tall just by looking at them. But if you just saw a picture of him by himself, not next to anybody, you wouldn't know how tall he was. But he had a great natural body. And I think he first gravitated toward the weightlifting gym part of it. And he fit right in. You know, he had to be really, I think when he started, he said he was 160 pounds at 6'9". So he had to be a rail. And he started, and then he, you know, like anything else, you start talking to other lifters and they tell you, well, you need to get a little bigger, and, you know, but see, the more you work out, you know, you just burn it up. But if you use anabolic steroids and you talk to somebody who's kind of knows what they're doing, yeah, it will work. See, I took anabolic steroids one time, but nobody told me you're supposed to work out with it. I just got fatter now.
You know, they did a test once, apparently, so I read years ago, that they gave people who worked out, like 4 different control groups, like 2 people who worked out, one on steroids, your groups, 1 group on steroids, 1 group without steroids working out, and then 2 groups, 1 without steroids, 1 with steroids, not working out whatsoever. And even the people who didn't work out at all still built muscle when taking steroids. So they say.
Even people who didn't use steroids at all?
No. I'm talking like people who didn't work out at all, if they were on steroids, would still build some muscle.
Oh, possibly, I guess. See, steroids were invented for recovery patients. Say somebody had been in a bad accident and they were having trouble regaining strength. They would just give them steroids. That's how it started. Then, of course, with anything to do with bodybuilding, they're going to find out a way they can use this for their own purposes. And that's how steroids first started, I guess. But now the steroids are so advanced, I wouldn't even know, if you came up to me and talked to me about it, I wouldn't even know what you're talking about. If it's beyond the steroids of the 90s, forget it. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, let's get back to Sid and his early run in wrestling, and it was in Memphis wrestling. So apparently he was discovered by Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo back in the day, and he was trained by Tojo Yamamoto.
Guess where he was found, probably?
In the gym, I guess.
In a gym, exactly. That's where they first saw him. And I heard this story, but they just said, wow, he looks like a wrestler. And of course, everybody in Memphis knew who the wrestlers were. We were the show in Memphis back in the day. There goes, it grabbed ratings that only primetime got. It got the same ratings that, say, Dallas would get, the old show Dallas. And that's when you had 3 networks. I'm not dating myself, but everybody knew the wrestlers because on Saturday morning, that's what all the kids lived for. Let's turn it on 11 o'clock in the morning and watch. And it was a live show. It wasn't taped or anything. It was live. So what you did, it went out there. I'm sorry, it was taped. It was taped on, I think, a Thursday and played on Saturday. No, it was a live show. Oh, Memphis was live. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure was.
So he's trained by Tojo Yamamoto, and his first months in the territory, he's Lord Humongous. I was thinking Lord Humongous from Mad Max and Jason the Terrible. It must be like the most overused characters in wrestling for a long time because there were so many different versions of it, I guess.
Well, this was before the days that people could claim intellectual property. People didn't even know intellectual property. They didn't know what the words meant. But now we even find out on this channel certain things you can't use because they have, what do they have on it? A patent or a
trademark.
A trademark, and we can't use it. So there are some, this is for the people that are listening, there's some things we would like to show, but we can't show because we can't show that we have permission to use it. And if you do it here on YouTube, they can be rather severe.
With that being said, how bad was Sid when he first started?
Well, he's probably no worse than a lot of other people when they start. You don't know what to do. You don't even know the purpose of, or even how it worked. Because at 6'9", he's not as good an athlete as, say, a guy who's 6'1". Because a guy 6'1" usually has more control over his arms and his legs. A 6'9" guy would be going everywhere. So, and I think explaining to Sid what we're trying to do, he probably understood it, but his body is unfamiliar with it. So like anything else, he has to take his time and he has to learn it. See, Eddie Graham, and I brought his name up quite a few times, he has said that it takes about 5 years for a newcomer to really learn the business and what's expected and how to get it over. And I thought about that long and hard. Yeah, it does probably take about, I'd say 4 years anyway. I mean, some guys are faster than others, but to really learn how to get a match over and get it working, because the fans, they know they've seen 1,000 or 2,000 matches, and they know when something doesn't work right, and they know a feeling you're trying to give them, and it takes a while. You are performing in front of a live audience, and that's why I always tell newcomers, listen to your audience. They'll tell you all you need to know if you know how to read them. And I call that reading the temperature in the room. If you go to the ring and the people are hot, they're going to be hot. So if they go to the ring and they're like looking at you, well, you got some work to do. So you got to warm them up. But if you take that temperature in the room, and you learn that whether somebody's teaching you that or not, you will learn that just by osmosis, just by being around it. So, and, everybody, I think when they start, they want to pop the crowd right away. It doesn't work that way. But Sid learned like everybody else, and I think he learned pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he was very gifted physically. He had the face, he had the height, he had the body, he had the charisma. He just had natural charisma pretty early on. The wrestling would get better over time as well, and the Paters did choke slams and power bombs and that kind of thing, and entrances especially. Were you with Sid in the Fuller territory at the time? Because he was working with Shane Douglas as his childhood friend that I didn't learn until recently. He wasn't childhood friends; it was just story. But yeah, how was he in the Fuller territory? Because there's very little on that.
I think that's where he first started using Sid Vicious in that territory there. Because I had known him in Memphis as the Lord Humongous. And that's when I I suggested the name Sid Vicious because I've been reading about the Sex Pistols, that rock group in the UK, and Sid Vicious was a great name for him. And he came in with Downtown Bruno. That, what was his last name? Whipplestein, Harvey Whipplestein.
Well, he was Harvey Whippleman in WWF. But yeah, so Downtown Bruno managed him before the WWF, didn't he?
Yes, yes. And he came in as a, I don't even know how he got in touch with them. I think I may have brought him up. I can't remember. It's been so long. But anyway, he made his way to Continental and did very, very well.
So Sid's leg break, we're not going to watch that. I keep seeing stills of it. It's upsettingly hideous.
Oh, I cannot watch it either. I'm glad you did that because, I mean, you could show it, but I wouldn't watch it.
No, I'm not watching it because if I'm squeamish, as you know, I'm very squeamish with leg injuries, especially. But it took him 6 years to recover. To actually get back in the ring and have a match. And he didn't have matches like he used to have matches, they were just like indie matches. Quick in and out kind of affairs. John Laurinaitis is apparently the one to blame. He said, Sid, you must do this off. It wasn't even off the top rope. I think it was off the second rope. And it was like a one-legged kick. So he kicked with one leg, land on the other. And that's what caused it to snap.
That even sounds bad.
Yeah. Rob Van Dam used to do it all the time, but he never broke his leg. But Sid's, 9 inches taller. Yes, God knows how much heavier. But
Sid told them he didn't want to do that.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Yep.
And no, you got to do it. You got to do it. And end up breaking. It's like if you took the cigar and you just broke it a 90-degree angle. Not quite, but almost. And if anybody hasn't seen this, be warned because it's one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in wrestling.
Yeah. So in later years, I've told you once or twice, Dutch, that I thought, let's get Sid on as a guest. I think he'd be a great guest. And I think, we know more now that he was dealing with cancer for several years, so I guess, he was making podcast appearances as late as a month ago. Mm-hmm. But you tried to get in touch with him, and he was just off the grid. Is that right? Did you have like an old number for him?
I had a number, and I'm going to have a guy on here soon, Downtown Bruno, Harvey Wimpleman. That was his manager. They kind of found each other when both of them were first starting. And Bruno didn't even have a number on him. And they lived not that far apart over there in Mississippi, right outside Memphis. But I think Bruno, what he told me, that he hadn't talked to Sid in a while. And you would think, listen, I'm reading here the other day, when the news hit, his son put it out. I think his son is named Gunner. Mm-hmm. And his son put it out that Sid had passed away and he had a brain cancer. Was that it?
Right. So it was only announced as cancer. Maybe have been brain cancer, but I don't want anyone to quote me of saying, it was definitely that. I just heard through the grapevine it might have been that.
And when I read it, was the first I'd heard anything about it. I don't even think Bruno, and I was talking to him like 6-8 months ago. And when you get cancer, it just doesn't come up and kill you right away. You should know you have cancer months and months, if not years in advance. But Bruno didn't say anything about it unless he just kept it, unless Sid just kept it quiet. And that sounds like in Sid's style. If you don't need to know, you don't need to know. And I think he kept that quiet. And I didn't know anything. I didn't even know he was sick. And I think most people didn't know that either. But it finally got him at 63. And I saw a picture of him not too long ago. It looked like he'd lost a considerable amount of weight, but he still looked like Sid. He still, he had a shirt on. You couldn't tell what the body looked like, but he still looked like he was in fairly decent shape. And of course, I don't know when this picture was taken, but I'm going to say, I think within the last 6 or 8 months, I think.
So there's one more thing I wanted to bring up, because I wanted to book him, and I was like, I'd heard reputation that he was just too flaky. Whether you gave him a booking appearance or not, it was never a guarantee he'd show up. And apparently Sid was banned from wrestling in New York. This was post WCW, I think. because he had no-showed so many bookings that he had been advertised for in advance that the New York State Commission just said he can turn up to shows, but you can't advertise him anymore because he was just so flaky.
So you can't even advertise he's going to make an appearance.
Yeah, in the state of New York, no, you couldn't.
The way I read it was you can't advertise he's going to have any kind of a. You could advertise he's going to be making an appearance. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I messed it up. Apparently, you couldn't advertise him being on a show in advance because there was no guarantee he'd turn up. So one last question I'll ask you about Sid, then we'll move on to the news, and I think it's an interesting one because as we've looked at before, there are 6 different instances where he was either fired or let go or quit in weird circumstances. Sid, I guess, he could have been an even bigger star, but he was getting in his way rather with, wanting to do softball or just didn't want to do stuff. And, that's his prerogative. And, he'd just rather be a family man. So it wasn't exactly, for the wrong reasons that he was not a bigger star in that sense because there are more important things in his life. But I do think, one, could Sid have been a bigger star? And 2, was Sid a big draw, in your opinion, in the history of wrestling?
Sid was a big draw. If they handled Sid right, put him over like the psycho he truly portrayed, and did a very believable job. And the example I use is you're walking down a semi-lit back alley at night, and all of a sudden you see somebody looking like Sid standing there by himself looking at you. What are you going to do?
Shit my pants.
No kidding. And you're going to go the other way? Yeah, I would think. So that's the prerequisite I used to say, is he a good heel? Because if you're looking at him, and I think when you first see Sid looking at you, even in a bar, if he's sitting at the end of it and he's looking at you and you're looking at him, I think you have some trepidation about whether to even say hello to him because you don't know. He's not brimming with friendliness. So I think you'd be afraid of him because that's what wrestling is. When you see a heel come down the aisle, you're going to have a preconceived notion about what they're like in real life. That I wonder, is he really like that? And Sid, it's very easy to him to portray a dangerous individual. And that's exactly what you want him to play in that ring. Because if he goes up against one of your favorites, well, you want your favorites to beat him, but you're not so sure. That's what makes wrestling what it is today. Sometimes it's not what is said, it's what is portrayed and what is presented to you. Even without words. I think Sid is the type, you don't even need words to talk about him. But I'd like to say one thing to Sid's family, his wife, and his son. Condolences to the family. Sid, I made a lot of trips with him. I always got along with him. He was crazy sometimes, but not crazy out of the blue. But he was just and he was a fun guy to be with. And he did have a soft heart in his spot. In his heart, a soft spot for, I saw a kid that went out to the ring with him and he had, what do you have, Down syndrome?
Yeah, he was a neighbor of Sid's and he was a big wrestling fan that he bonded over.
It took him on TV.
Actually took him on WCW TV and managed him for one night, yeah. He was even on USWA TV in 95, so he brought him on more than once.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that shows he has a soft heart for people that sometimes don't get a fair shake in life. And sometimes you judge people on that. Sid was very family oriented, like you said. And I know he loved his son because he used to talk about his son all the time and his wife too. So my condolences to them. And Sid, I'm glad I knew you and I'm glad I was your friend. He's been to my house lots of times. So, and basically as a guy, I love Sid, good guy. And he could do whatever he did, but I always just dismissed it by saying, well, that's Sid. and you either took it or you didn't take it. And that's what we got.
As a fan, I'll briefly say Sid in many ways embodies everything that's right with wrestling. He was huge. He was a freak. Memorable interviews, huge charisma, imitable.
The face.
Yeah, the face. In a lot of ways, Sid is everything that is right with pro wrestling and a lot of things that are sort of forgotten about what is right about pro wrestling. And I defy pretty much anyone as a fan to watch pretty much any performance of Sid and not leave afterwards with a smile on your face. Whether it went right, whether it was a great match, whether it was a terrible match, or anything in between, Sid was memorable.
And you never saw Sid out of shape. Mm-hmm. Ever. Because he would go and he would kill himself. He would kill himself in the gym. And he was driven to take a kid from West Memphis, Arkansas, and for him to go as far as he went. Of course, the size took him, but I think he put West Memphis on the map, and he was a good representative of that town.
Why don't I give you, because we'll do it in order, but something else with WCW is Sid just constantly, and maybe around the summertime, maybe around softball season, Sid would just, once again, like that match with El Gigante, just poof, just disappear. He would claim a neck injury. He's claimed neck injuries quite a lot in his career, I found. But how often would Sid not show up? Or would he even give a reason sometimes?
Sid had an affinity and a love for softball. He loved that. So what he would do, and he didn't live in Memphis. He lived in, I think, West Memphis, Arkansas, which is right across the river. And that's where he grew up. And he loved softball, and he'd get all his friends together. I would like to say church friends, but it's probably not. It's just guys that he grew up with, and they played baseball, and they played in this little league, and they all had bragging rights around the town or who had the best softball team. And I have heard of teams coming in as far away as Texas and Oklahoma to play them because it was that good. I mean, Sid was the manager. I guess he outfitted the team or whatever, bought them the shirts or whatever. And they did have a good team. So if Sid had a game, and it was an important game to Sid, because they didn't play like I said, I thought it was a church league. They don't play church league. They play like semi-pro softball players. These guys were pretty good. So when it came time and it was going to be a tough game, Sid said, I got a book, got to get hurt. I got to get hurt. My neck. Then they would sometimes say anything. They'd say, well, we heard you played in that softball game. I didn't play. I was there. But I didn't play. They said, well, we heard you were there and you hit a home run. Well, I said, well, I did. I had to do it at the end because the other guy was hurt too. And I trusted myself. And he'd just wrap them up in, conversation, and they'd say, screw it. But he loved softball, and he would miss quite a few shots because he could miss. You know what I'm saying? When you're making big money, $400,000 back in those days, I guess it'd be like $2 million now, $1.5 million anyway.
No, maybe $1 million in 1990 equivalent, I'd say.
More than that. But let's say $1 million. And it went a lot farther than $1 million would go today. If he didn't need the money, what are you going to do? Fire him? You can't fire him. You could, but at $1 million, he could have an attorney, and he would cost you more in attorney fees. And so Sid actually had him. I don't know who talked to him and got him in such a shape that he could just say, no, you're not going to do anything. Talk to my attorney. And by the time they did that, it cost them more money, so they would just have to go along with Sid. So he was a pretty smart guy in business-wise, even though he did leave. And I wish he hadn't have done that, but it's nothing to me anyway. It was his career, so he knew what he was doing.
Would he leave for a day, or would he leave for like a week or a month?
I think Sid, he wanted to say he left for a weekend. Well, that'd be 3 or 4 shots sometimes. And he said, well, I told you I was hurt. And I think what he wanted to do was engage them in conversation. Then he'd turn it over to his lawyer. Then he'd just step out of it.
So you're saying that it actually got legal at times then?
Oh, yeah, it did. At least threatening to get legal. Because if you can back anybody like WCW up with their legal team and WWF back them up, yeah, you were accomplishing something.
I don't even know what the difference between baseball and softball is. I mean, is softball just underarm throwing or something?
It's the same rules, basically, but ball is just a softer ball and a bigger ball. It's what it is. And basically the same rules. And softball can be, you pitch it just up in the air. Unless you're playing fast pitch. You ever seen fast pitch softball?
No.
Wow. There used to be a guy called the King and his Court. And he was a fast pitch softball pitcher. And he would play with 4 guys. And they would go into a community and they would play their softball team with 9 players. And the King and his Court, he'd play with 4 or no more than 5, had a catcher, a pitcher, I guess a couple of outfielders, I guess, and that's 4, and he'd play 1 more player and maybe in the infield. But he was a fast pitch, so instead of just pitching the ball like this and letting it go up, he would come underarm and it'd be a 90 mile an hour fastball with a softball. And they weren't used to it and they couldn't hit it. I have heard that this guy, and he toured, it was like a little show, and they'd get X number of dollars to come in there and play the JCs or the Rotary Club or somebody. And he has struck out, not the whole lineup, but if he faced 27 batters or 30 batters, he'd strike out about 22 of them, 23 of them. And of course, he was the draw. You would go, the fans that bought a ticket, they would come to see him play. And if their team got a hit off of him, it was a win. So look him up sometimes. I'm telling everybody, the King and his Court, very famous back in the day. And now that brings up the question, I wonder, did Sid ever play the King? We should look that up. Because the King he was a king of softball. And he was great.
Apparently Sid tried to actually make a career of it after the WWF run in like 92 to 93 before he went to WCW. He tried to attempt to make a career out of softball somehow, maybe. I mean, is there much money in softball?
Well, I don't know.
Well, if you don't know, there probably isn't.
I never played softball for a living. I don't know whatsoever. I don't know anything about it. I know how to watch a game and understand it. That's about all I know.